I've lived in the house I live in now literally since I was born. It's the only place I've ever lived. And since I was a little girl, I've had experiences here. But I won't talk about all of them in this story, or it would be 100 pages long. I can tell you that when Anton, my fiance, moved into my house, the activity became much more severe. It's kind of like whatever's here was used to me, but when Anton moved in, it got really territorial or something. Before he came, stuff would happen, but nothing really frightening. Mainly, I'd see shadows and stuff. My mom would hear children playing and giggling in my bedroom when I wasn't home, and my dad told me he saw boxy black shadows in the kitchen. I saw a silhouette that looked like a man in a tall hat with two women on either side of him in my living room. Didn't scare me though, they were just having a good time, it seemed like. I think that was something residual. Probably because of growing up in a haunted house, I've always had a bit of a fascination with the paranormal. It both scares the crap out of me and fascinates me. Anton, though, wanted nothing to do with anything paranormal, and he'd get upset at me if I even tried talking about it. I think he had a bad experience before when he was a kid. Anyways, not long after he moved in, activity, which kind of comes and goes in this house, picked up with a vengeance. Banging on the walls, voices when no one else was home, stuff getting thrown, you name it. I was in the living room one time with Anton, and he was on the other side of the room from where I was standing folding laundry, and I had felt something thwack my back, and I turned around and saw a red towel on the floor behind me. My fiance was engrossed in his computer game, and I know it wasn't him that threw it. And it was only me and him in the house at that time. We'd see weird bluish lights too that had no identifiable source to them, usually in the kitchen area. Anton swears a glass candle holder got thrown at him. I saw the broken glass all over the floor, but I didn't actually see it get thrown. The scariest experience Anton and I had was one night when I went to bed before him. He'd been laying on the couch in the living room at about 1 or 2 in the morning watching TV, and I went to bed. I then woke up because I heard a very loud bang come from the wall in my room behind my bed. And when I woke up, Anton was sitting on the floor at the foot of the bed. I'm like, "What was that? And why are you in here sitting on the floor? I thought you were watching your show." He goes, "You heard that too?" Yeah, I'd have to have been deaf not to. Then he told me what happened to him out in the living room. Evidently, he'd had the lights off and was watching his favorite show, and he saw something weird out the corner of his eye, and when he looked, he saw what looked like faces coming out of the wall. Sounds overdramatic, I know, but he swore on his life he was telling the truth, and I'd heard one other person say they'd seen that too in my living room, an ex-friend of mine who spent the night before at my house, June. He was scared to death and ran in my bedroom, but he sat on the floor because he didn't want to wake me. That was when the banging on the wall started. Anton said it had gone on for 10 minutes before I woke up. So I was pretty freaked out after that, but I somehow managed to fall back asleep, and Anton went to bed too. I should mention he talks in his sleep a lot. Normally, I'll just sit there and listen to him talk and then go back to bed. He woke me up talking as usual, nothing new there. But then he started to get really agitated, and he kept talking and trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. Suddenly, it was like something had gotten in between me and him, and it literally grabbed him and threw him. He flew out of the bed and hit the wall next to the bed and whacked his head on my nightstand. I started screaming, and he was awake now and understandably pretty freaked out. My fiance's 6'2" and 200 pounds. I'm only 5'6" and about 140. I couldn't have thrown him like that if my life depended on it. He flew off that bed like someone had shoved him, and he hit that wall with a lot of force. He actually chipped some of the plaster off the wall. Yeah, it was a terrifying night, and I always sleep with the lights on now. Also, the night after that, we both heard something weird. We heard what sounded like something being dragged down the hall, only it sounded like whatever it was being dragged over leaves. It was a kind of rustling, dragging sound. Only obviously there's no foliage in our hallway, so I'm going to guess that too was probably something residual. Our house isn't particularly old. It was built in the early 1970s. I think the residual part of it might be connected to the land, not the house.
because those silhouettes I saw in my living room when I was a little girl having a good time and listening to music and dancing, the music and talking is what had woken me up, were dressed in really poofy old-fashioned dresses, and the guy had on a suit and top hat, definitely not 70s style clothes, much older. There are a lot of theories about why my house is haunted, but I think it's definitely the land, because many other people who live in my area in Florida who I know are also experiencing paranormal activity in their homes. I think I might also have or have had a poltergeist possibly. At least that would explain a lot, like why stuff would mainly happen when I was scared or angry. When me and my fiancé would fight, that's when he'd most likely get things thrown at him or hear me calling to him after I'd left the house and it was just him there. Recently, not a whole lot has been happening. As I said, it comes in waves. Sometimes nothing at all will happen for months or even years. I heard that in the spirit world they don't experience time passing the way we do, so it's like something will happen every single day for a month, then nothing will happen for a year. It's very strange. Actually, my dad passed away not that long ago, and I believe he's here protecting me, so that could also be why nothing scary has happened in so long. It gives me peace to know he is here watching over me, not gone. His walking cane was out in the garage, and then last December I went out in the living room to get something and his cane was in there by the Christmas tree. Nobody had touched it in months. I guess Dad was letting me know he was there celebrating the holidays with me. So I don't think my house will ever not be haunted. I don't know exactly why it is or what happened there, but I feel safe with my dad watching over me. And at least my poor fiancé hasn't gotten anything else thrown at him lately.
Let me start off by saying that I no longer live in that house. I am a 33-year-old man with a wife and child, and I haven't lived in the home since 1998. I also want to say that I loved the house I'm going to write about. Our experiences, though strange, were in no way sinister or threatening. My parents didn't have much money when they first married. My father was just off of a divorce, and when he met my mother, she was just coming off of a divorce as well. She already had 2 children at this time. The year was 1972. My brother was born in 1974, and they lived in a cramped apartment. They had no yard for the kids to play in, and they were increasingly unhappy with their neighbors. It was time to look into buying a home. In 1978, my father saw an old white colonial in New Britain, CT for sale. At that time, it was on the market for $44,000. He looked at it with the family, and they fell in love. 3 bedrooms, a full basement, walk-up finished attic area, a nice big backyard, and a 2-car garage. Perfect. They bought it. Things were great. They set up the bedrooms, my sister had her own room, and my 2 brothers shared a room. I was not born yet. The first few nights were uneventful. Then, one night, my parents were sleeping, but my father woke up sometime in the middle of the night. He thought he heard footsteps coming up the big staircase that leads from the front foyer area. He then heard the footsteps reach the top of the stairs and stop at each door on the 2nd floor. He shrugged it off as one of the kids wandering or looking for the bathroom and not knowing where it was because it was a new home. He fell asleep. My mother woke a little while later to the sound of footsteps outside their bedroom. She noticed that the bedroom door was open as well. It was at this time she saw the figure of a woman standing in the doorway dressed in blue. The woman then spoke to her and asked her, "Do you know where Margaret is?" At this time, my mother said she was frozen and broke out into a cold sweat. She could not say anything, and that is all she remembered. The next morning, my dad and I shared their experiences. The footsteps my dad heard may have been the woman my mother saw. She didn't share the experience with many people, but she did share it with her father. My grandfather was a practical realist. He told my mother she was full of crap. I will share more about him in a moment. My mother did not see the ghost again, yet strange things would occur. Items would be moved, shades in the house would go up on their own, footsteps would be heard, and every so often a fleeting glimpse of something darting up the stairs was seen out of the corner of your eye. On the night of September 30th, 1981, I was born. That night, my grandfather and grandmother were watching the other kids at the house while my parents were at the hospital.
The kids were in bed, and my grandfather was still awake in the living room reading. He looked up from reading and noticed the figure of a woman dressed in blue move across the living room and go up the staircase. It did not speak to him, but just went about her business. When my mother came home from the hospital, her father took her aside and said, "I take back what I said. I believe you now." Growing up, I noticed things like cabinets open after being closed, footsteps, and other strange occurrences like music in the attic with no radio or other source. We nicknamed our ghost Margaret. Years passed by, and one day my father was talking with a neighbor who lived in the back adjoining property. They were discussing previous owners, and he told my father of a woman who lived in the house previously with her sister named Margaret. Could the ghost be the woman looking for her sister, Margaret? In 1998, we moved to a new home across town, but I have nothing but fond memories of that home. We never felt unsafe or threatened. We knew we were possibly sharing our home with a supernatural presence, and we were okay with that.
My friend Dee moved to a very old house complex in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. She always had the tradition of having a lot of people around, and I always visited her house. Being one of her best friends, I took care of her dog Fred whenever she traveled. The house was a very well-structured but old house, and I discovered it was truly haunted after the experiences I had there and what we discovered later on. Every person that spent the night over had, in some grade, a different kind of experience. I myself, being a medium and constantly going there, had a number of experiences I can't even imagine. Dee moved into the new house with her boyfriend R, and they constantly had get-togethers, and all the friends would gather for happy hours and pre-night outs. We usually put the beers in the fridge in the kitchen, and whenever I went alone to get a beer, I felt a very strange sensation, like there was somebody watching me, and had the feeling I needed to get out very fast. My first real encounter with an entity was at the first time I spent the night there alone. I was upstairs in one of the 3 bedrooms, and Fred was barking a lot. Fred never stays outside because she got him used to sleeping inside the house. So I went downstairs to quiet him and decided to get myself a glass of water and go back to the bedroom and try to sleep. I went to the fridge and again started to feel that weird sensation, and as I turned around, I saw the figure of a man, but could not see his face. The only thing I saw was that he was wearing a marine blue robe like a tunic. The figure got out of the kitchen like the speed of light, and I stood there really scared. The next night I spent the night there, Dee and R, her boyfriend, were there too. I was already in bed, lights off, just waiting to fall asleep, when I started to feel the same bad sensation I felt when I was in the kitchen. One of the sides of the bed was connected to the wall, so I felt this slight wind pass by my left arm, and inside my head I heard a voice say, "What are you doing here?" I tried to concentrate to identify the characteristics of what this entity looked like, and I was able to see it was a male figure, dark skin, but could not see his face. I prayed for all that to stop and finally fell asleep. The days went by, and every time I visited my friend, I had encounters and experiences with not only the blue-robed man, but heard children crying, laughing, or voices talking, footsteps, bangs on the wall. Sometimes it would get very cold in the room, or suddenly the dog started to bark non-stop. She herself never believed me because she's skeptical about everything, but after about 6 months, she and her boyfriend started having constant and ugly fights. He suddenly became rude and aggressive and started to treat everybody in a very bad way. He was constantly in a bad mood and started to become aggressive with the dog too. I told my friend she needed to bless the house because the problem was spiritual. And instead of calling a priest, she called a candomblé wizard, and things just got worse, and R just got more aggressive as the days went by. A few months later, I went there one more time to stay the night. Her mother was in town, and we started having a conversation about the house. She asked me if I had ever felt any weird sensations, and told me that she was in the same room where the entity communicated with me, and she felt like there was somebody in the room with her and did not want her there. I told her about my experiences and said that I was sure there was a spirit attached to the house, and that was not a good thing. On that same night, I decided to sleep in the living room because I wanted to watch TV until late at night, but I ended up falling asleep.
That is when I suddenly woke up to look down and see myself sleeping on the couch. I looked out the window in despair and saw a young woman walking outside. She looked at me and waved. I felt my body trying to wake up, but I was still there, awake in my spirit. Then I fell down, still spiritually speaking, and when I looked up, I saw R looking at me with a hateful expression on his face, eyes at me like a threat. My body was struggling to wake up, and when I finally did, I was out of breath and desperately afraid. I sat down and prayed for the rest of the night. At that point, I understood that whatever was there was influencing my friend's boyfriend, R, and he was full of hate in his heart and bad thoughts in his mind. After all these things, my friend decided to move to another house, still in the same complex of houses, just across the street. She and R had broken up and he was no longer living there, but the energy of the house was still dark and heavy. She called me and asked to help her move so I would spend the night there, and on the next day we would take the boxes and furniture to the other house. I decided to sleep with the lights on because I really didn't want to feel or hear anything else, and I don't know why, the dark always made things worse. So I fell asleep and had this very weird dream. I dreamed I had woken up and saw this little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, running from my room to hers, and the boy looked at me crying and disappeared. I ran to her room to see if the boy was there and saw my friend crying. She hugged me and said, "Don't worry, I am here to help you. Don't be afraid." I woke up out of breath, and as soon as I woke up, I started hearing footsteps in the room. I prayed, but the footsteps didn't stop, so I decided to go to the living room where Fred was, thinking that maybe he would protect me in some way. I laid on the couch and started praying, and meanwhile I started hearing a humming sound, like a woman singing to a baby. Hum, hum, and I thought, please God, make this go away, but it wouldn't. I tried to close my eyes and sleep, and as I started to fall asleep, I would hear a voice inside my head, "I am not going to let you sleep." This happened until sunrise. I was being haunted at my friend's house by a very strong entity. To me, it felt extremely unpleasant and frightening to have that experience. I know a lot of people had had experiences, but I think I was the most harmed one there because it was really trying to make me go away. The next day we moved. I was so relieved I wouldn't have to go there anymore, but was still very bothered and wanted explanations. So I decided to ask the gatekeeper about the house, and he told me that nobody ever stayed in that house for more than 1 year, that around 10 years ago, a male witch from Candomblé bought the house, and he received all kinds of persons looking to do black magic and offerings to entities, and all of his crafts were done inside the house, and he was a black man that always wore a marine blue robe. I'm sure that until this day, the spirit of the man is in the house, spooking people out and obsessing the weak ones, influencing them to do negative things. I'm sure there are other spirits trapped in there, maybe a woman, a child, I don't know. I know that until this day, I feel the goosebumps whenever I sit at my friend's porch and look across the street to the windows. I always have the feeling he is there, watching.
I grew up in a haunted house. It was an old brick house in a historic neighborhood nestled in the Fox River Valley, about 45 miles outside of Chicago. We moved there when I was just 5, and it wasn't until I moved out as a young woman that I realized just how unusual our experiences in that house really were. The first time I remember really being frightened by the house, I must have been about 6. My little sister and brother and I were still young enough that we were all sharing the large back bedroom, my sister and I in bunks, and my brother in his own little bed. It was the middle of the night, and with a start, I found myself wide awake. I don't know what woke me, but immediately I could sense that something wasn't right. I was on the top bunk, and I felt convinced that someone was standing beside my head, staring at me. I was afraid to even breathe. I squeezed my eyes shut and refused to look. Suddenly, there was a loud clatter of noise in the closet. Petrified, I just lay as still as I could, and after what felt like hours, I finally fell back asleep. From that point on, I remember a pretty steady stream of frightening incidents. For example, when I would leave my room for a moment, I would often come back to find my radio turned all the way up, or the radio and the TV turned on, or the shades on all the windows up. In several heart-stopping instances, the radio turned on or the shades would drop while I was still in the room. My sister would often leave her room for a moment only to return to door locked from the inside. In the closet I mentioned earlier, books would fall off the shelf and hangers would fall off the rod for no apparent reason. One night, I was up late reading in my bed when I heard someone pacing in the hallway. The paces were short, like someone was just walking back and forth in front of my parents' room at the opposite end of the hall. Since my mom is prone to worry, I assumed it was her and climbed out of bed to go see what was the matter. As I pulled my bedroom door open, my heart froze. The hall light was on, and I could see to the end of the hall, where my parents' door was shut, and it was completely empty. I quickly shut my door, returned to bed, and stubbornly resumed my reading. Most of the activity seemed to happen on the second floor, where the bedrooms were. One night, the family was hanging out in the dining room after dinner when a tremendous bang in the bedroom above us shook the entire house. We all cried out, it was so loud, and for a stunned moment just looked at one another in shock. My dad insisted that it must have been a sonic boom. When we went upstairs and found nothing amiss, I accepted his explanation. It wasn't until I finally experienced a sonic boom in 2001 that I realized that that is not what we felt that night. The only way I can describe it is as if a very heavy trunk or armoire was dropped from a good height onto the floor above our heads. After we had been in the house several years, my mom confided in us that when we first moved in, she woke up several times to see a woman standing at the foot of her bed watching her. She wondered if it could possibly be the ghost of her mother, who had died when my mom was a kid. After talking it over with my dad, she decided that even if it was her mother, it was too frightening for her to handle, and so the next time her visitor appeared, she told her to leave and never come back. The woman obliged. This is the only time my mother has ever talked about ghosts, and since then she has said she doesn't believe in them.
I most often experience things in bed. Often I would be sleeping and suddenly find myself rudely awoken by some unseen force hitting the bed to the right or left of my feet. Sometimes it was a gentle push to the mattress, but other times it was like a fist or heavy book hitting the bed. Sometimes it felt like an animal jumping into bed, and I would reach down, thinking it was one of the cats, to find that I was still alone in bed. The summer after my freshman year in college was the worst. I would wake up to the very jarring sensation of my entire bed hitting the floor, as if it had been lifted up just a tiny bit and dropped again. It was also during that summer break that I saw something I will never forget. It was a sunny morning. I was in bed, slowly coming around, when I heard whispering in my bedroom. I opened my eyes to see who was in my room, and standing directly beside my bed and looking down at me were two distinct shapes, an adult and a child. I was squinting up at them because sunlight was pouring in the window to the right of my bed, but the strange thing was that even though they were standing opposite the window, they were completely dark and featureless like silhouettes. Startled and confused, I started to push myself up out of bed and said, "What?" And at that moment, they vanished. That was the only time that I ever saw anything that might have been a ghost in that house, but my brother was not so lucky. As a teenager, he saw a group of hooded figures on our front porch, hovering lights in his bedroom, a bizarre animal-looking creature in the living room, and eventually started receiving verbal taunts and threats from a demon in his own bedroom. While whatever was in the house threatened my brother overtly, it was a little slyer with my sister and I. On several occasions, we both woke up to find chunks of our hair missing. It was as if someone had snuck into our rooms while we slept and with choppy, imprecise strokes cut our hair less than an inch from our faces. At first, we suspected our little brother. It was the less frightening option, but he denied it ardently, even tearfully, until we finally accepted that there might be another explanation. Another bone-chilling incident was the axe. One morning when I was a senior in high school, we came down for breakfast, and sitting in the middle of our beautiful antique dining room table was an axe. It had not been there the night before. There was no reason for it to be there now. In fact, I don't remember ever having seen it before. We didn't have a fireplace, we lived in suburbia, and my dad was not exactly Mr. Handyman. Everyone denied having put it there, and so it sat in the dining room for several days until someone finally had the good sense to put it out in the garage. The axe was something that seemed to appear out of nowhere, but some things would simply disappear and then reappear. I once had whole week's wages disappear out of a coat pocket, only to have the full amount reappear in the same coat pocket which had been searched by me, my mom, and my sister 2 weeks later. My sister had a similar incident with her keys. Other things would just be rearranged. When my sister and her husband were still dating, he lived for a while in my parents' house, in my old room. One day he asked my mom who had been coming into his room and moving things. My mom was shocked. "No one," she insisted. "We respect your privacy and would never go into your room." He then explained that almost every night when he came home, he would find the objects on his headboard shelf rearranged. He would write them, and then the next day they would be moved around again. He said that the object that was moved the most was a framed picture of my sister. It would often be face down or turned around. Mystified and exasperated by the events in the house, my brother and I tried to research its history but found nothing significant. However, my parents, who were always skeptical of the idea that the house was haunted, came home from a visit to a neighborhood pub one night with the interesting news that they had run into a young man whose parents rented the second floor of the house before we bought it, and he had asked them how they liked living in a haunted house.
I'm Amy. I live with my mum, my dad, and my sister in a house in England. We moved in a little under 2 years ago, in October, so close to Halloween, everyone already had pumpkins outside their houses. The house was built in 1930, and it is positioned on the same hill as a graveyard. It is said that the ghost of a woman and the ghost of a black puma haunt the sports ground at the top of the hill, just meters away from my house. The house was in a state when we moved in. Peeling wallpaper, carpet smelling of smoke, and possibly faulty electrics. At first, while we were still dealing with the mess, no paranormal activity occurred. It was only once we started decorating that things started to get strange. We took up the carpet in our family room and put new flooring down. Since then, I have felt a cold chill up my spine whenever I've been in there. Next, we wallpapered our family room and changed the smoky curtains for new ones. A few days after this was completed, I was sitting at my computer desk on Facebook, and suddenly there was a knock on the wall beside me. A minute later, the family room door literally came off its hinges, so the top was hanging at an odd angle. We repaired the door, and my parents told me not to be worried by what had happened. They said the house was old anyway, and there were bound to be some faults. I tried to listen to them, but by that point I was already convinced of paranormal activity. About a month ago, I was in the car with my mum and my sister, driving back to our house from my dance class. We were listening to the Paramore song, Misguided Ghosts, which reminded me of the supernatural occurrences in my house. I started up a conversation with my mum about how I was positive ghosts were in our house. My mum denied it, but I kept arguing. A few moments later, I put my hand up to my face to brush some of my hair away, and my hand came away streaked with red. One look in the mirror told me my nose was bleeding and running onto my hand. My mum said it was just coincidence, but it seemed strange to me that I started bleeding just after talking about the ghost. I thought nothing more of it for a while, until an electric company came into our house. As it turns out, our house had faulty electrics, and they needed to be fixed immediately. The job took 2 weeks, and after that, more strange things started happening.
Once the electricians had left, we thought everything would get better. One night, my little sister, who was 9 years old, was asleep. It was 11 at night, and all of my family was sleeping with the exception of me. I read a lot at night and tend not to sleep until about 12. My door was open, and I suddenly heard my sister talking in her sleep. I was about to laugh at her funny habit until I heard someone talking back to her. There was nobody else there, but somebody was having a conversation with my little sister as she slept. Just 2 days ago, I was left at home alone for 5 hours. I had a day off school when the rest of my family had to go in. I was watching TV with the sound turned down low when I suddenly heard my dad's radio. It was tuned in to his favorite sports station, and the reporter talking was the one I recognized. However, when I walked into the kitchen to turn it off, I found that it had never been turned on in the first place. Back in the living room, I was standing up with my back to the sofa, watching TV. When something funny happened on the TV, I heard my little sister's laugh coming from the sofa behind me. I turned around, but nobody was there. I was getting really scared, and it got even worse when I heard my mother upstairs with the laundry basket, humming to herself as she sorted through the washing. I ran upstairs to go and get dressed. I was still in my pajamas. When I entered my room, I found a pile of clean laundry in my wardrobe. This was odd since I was sure it hadn't been there when my family had left that morning. I changed and then looked in the mirror to put on my makeup. In the mirror, I caught something flash across the room behind me. I got so scared I ran downstairs, and the whole while I was running, I heard somebody's footsteps on the stairs behind me. When I was downstairs, I put on some music. It always seems to calm me down. I was terrified to hear someone singing along to it in a very high voice, like a little girl. So you can see my reasons for believing in ghosts is simple. My house survived through WW2. The woman who lived here before us suffered from cancer. Her husband had heart attacks. We live on the same lane as a cemetery. I got a nosebleed after talking about the ghosts. Sometimes I hear a sound like a drill upstairs in my wardrobe. My dog barks nonstop sometimes for no apparent reason. It is said that animals can sense paranormal presences. I'm really young. I'm only 13. My parents and my sister don't believe me, so I'm alone in my beliefs. For more information on the ghost I believe may be haunting me, please comment and I will tell you everything that has happened.
I've remarried in 2003, and my husband has a house on Lake Superior that his family bought in 1969. It overlooks Lake Superior and is on the North Shore Drive, halfway to Two Harbors. Strange noises and events have been happening ever since then. I would hear loud bangs in the night in the other room when no one was there. At first, I thought it was the house settling or the wind, but it kept happening and it got louder over time. My husband worked nights sometimes, so I was alone a lot in the beginning. One night I was watching TV in the living room and I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I thought maybe my husband came home early, but when I looked, no one was there. The footsteps stopped right at the bottom of the stairs. I sat there for a while and then went to bed. The next morning, I told my husband, and he said it was probably the old pipes or something. He didn't seem worried. A few weeks later, I was in the kitchen making dinner. It was around 6 p.m. and still light out. I heard a door slam upstairs. I went up to check, and all the doors were open like they usually are. None were closed. I checked the closets too. Nothing. When I went back down, the TV was on a channel I don't watch. I had left it on the news. I turned it back and sat down. About 10 minutes later, the TV changed channels again by itself. I unplugged it that night and told my husband when he got home. He laughed and said maybe we need a new remote or the batteries are dying. Things got worse after that. One night I woke up to the sound of someone whispering in the bedroom. It sounded like a woman's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. My husband was asleep next to me, so I shook him awake. He didn't hear anything. The whispering stopped as soon as he woke up. I couldn't go back to sleep. The next day, I asked the neighbors if anyone had ever said anything about the house being haunted. They said no, but one lady told me the people who lived there before us moved out after only a year because they said it was too creepy. She didn't know why. My stepdaughter came to visit that summer. She was 16 at the time. She stayed in the guest room upstairs.
One morning, she came down and said she heard kids laughing outside her window at night, but when she looked, there was no one there. She said it happened 2 nights in a row. She also said her bed moved a little while she was in it, like someone sat on the edge and then got up. She thought it was me or her dad checking on her, but we were both downstairs watching a movie both times. After she left, I started seeing shadows in the hallway. I would walk from the kitchen to the living room and see a dark shape move across the wall. It wasn't my shadow because I was facing the other way. It happened a few times a week. I started leaving lights on all the time. My husband said I was imagining things and that the house was old and had lots of creaks. Then one night in the winter, it got really bad. We had a big snowstorm and the power went out for a few hours. We lit candles and sat in the living room. I heard the front door open and close, even though it was locked. My husband checked, and it was still locked. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the kitchen, like someone walking around in boots. We both went in there with a flashlight, and no one was there. The footsteps stopped when we walked in. When the power came back on, we went to bed. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of a baby crying. It was coming from the basement. We don't have kids, and the basement is just storage. I woke my husband, and he heard it too this time. He grabbed a bat, and we went downstairs together. The crying stopped as soon as we opened the basement door. We looked around, and nothing was there. No animals or anything. We went back to bed, but neither of us slept much.
The next day, my husband finally admitted that he had heard things before I moved in, but didn't want to scare me. He said he heard the whispering and the bangs, but thought it was nothing. He said his family never talked about it, but his mom once said the house had history and left it at that. A couple months later, I was home alone again. I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I felt someone touch my shoulder. It was a light touch, like a hand resting there for a second. I turned around fast, but no one was there. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I left the house and sat in the car until my husband got home. We talked about selling the house, but my husband didn't want to because his family had owned it for so long and the view is beautiful. Instead, we had a priest come and bless the house. The priest walked through every room and said some prayers. After that, things got a little better for a while. The bangs stopped for about 2 months. But then they started again. Not as loud, but still there. I would hear the TV turn on in the middle of the night, even when it was unplugged. One time I came home from the store and all the cabinets in the kitchen were open, every single one. My husband was at work, so it wasn't him. I closed them all and took pictures on my phone to show him later. My stepdaughter came back the next summer. She stayed in the same room. This time she woke up one night to see a woman standing at the foot of her bed. The woman was wearing an old-fashioned dress and just stood there looking at her. My stepdaughter screamed and the woman disappeared. She ran downstairs and slept on the couch the rest of the night. She didn't want to stay in the house after that. I started researching the history of the house. I found out that in the 1970s, a family lived there and the mother died in the basement from a heart attack. She was alone at the time. Her husband found her later. I don't know if that's connected, but it makes me wonder. We still live there. The activity comes and goes. Some months nothing happens and then it starts up again. I have learned to live with it. I talk to the house sometimes and say, "Please stop," or "Please leave us alone." It seems to help for a little while. My husband still doesn't like to talk about it much, but he believes me now. We have friends who have stayed over, and some of them have heard the bangs or the footsteps too. One friend said he heard a woman singing softly in the hallway at night. He thought it was me, but I was asleep. I don't know what is here exactly. Maybe the woman who died, or maybe something else. It doesn't feel mean or dangerous most of the time. It just feels like someone else is living here with us. I have gotten used to it after all these years. The house is beautiful and I love the view of the lake. But I always sleep with a light on now, and I never go in the basement alone at night.